Back in my childhood days, somewhere between the age of 6, I can't pinpoint the exact year anymore, I harbored this deep-seated, almost irrational dread of our family's basement, and looking back on it now as an adult, I have to admit that the place had a genuinely unsettling vibe, especially for a young kid like me. It was a sprawling, cavernous space beneath our house, dimly lit by a couple of bare bulbs that cast long, flickering shadows across the concrete floors and unfinished walls. Right in the heart of it all sat this massive L-shaped sectional sofa, upholstered in a soft, worn gray fabric that had seen better days, positioned directly in front of a sturdy wooden support beam that rose up like a sentinel from the floor to the ceiling. Just beyond that, facing the couch, was our outdated, bulky television set. The kind with a massive screen that took forever to warm up, hooked up to all our vintage video game consoles, from the Nintendo to whatever else we had collected over the years. The layout of the basement was cleverly designed in a looping circular fashion that wrapped around the central seating area, creating this endless path that could make you feel like you were wandering in circles if you weren't careful. In one corner, there was a cozy little booth with a built-in table, perfect for snacks or card games. Diagonally across from that was an old-fashioned wet bar, complete with dusty shelves and a faded mirror behind it, and hidden just beyond the bar was the door leading to the utility room where the washer, dryer, and furnace were tucked away. Then, in the corner nearest to the staircase that led back up to the safety of the main floor, there was a narrow doorway opening into my dad's makeshift home gym, filled with weights, a treadmill, and posters of motivational quotes on the walls. Our living situation was a bit unusual at the time, because my dad rented out the entire upstairs portion of the house to an elderly woman named Edith, a quiet widow who kept to herself mostly, so our family was confined to the ground level and this eerie basement below. My dad preferred to relax in the cozy living room upstairs, which is why all our gaming setup was banished down here to this subpar TV. He hardly ever came down, leaving it as our unofficial kids' domain. As the youngest in the family, with 2 older sisters who were significantly ahead of me in age, I often found myself playing solo when they were off doing their own things. On this particular day, my sisters were away at friends' houses for playdates or sleepovers, and my dad was most likely pulling a shift at his job, so it was just me and my mom rattling around the house. Normally, I'd team up with my sisters for video game marathons down there, and their presence would chase away any fears, but being by myself amplified every little creak and whisper in the air. I remember hesitantly making my way down those steep wooden stairs, the steps groaning under my small feet, and that basement door was the absolute worst. It had this annoying habit of refusing to stay open on its own, slowly swinging shut with a soft click unless you jammed something like a shoe or a book in front of it to prop it ajar. That closing door always made me feel completely cut off from the upstairs world, isolated in this underground lair with no quick escape if something went wrong. I plopped down on that fluffy couch, controller in hand, diving into whatever pixelated adventures I was obsessed with back then. Maybe Super Mario or something similar, and tried to lose myself in the game. But solitude made me hyper-aware. Any faint noise would jolt me, causing me to pause the screen and whip my head around, scanning the shadows for the source. The utility room was notorious for its array of creepy sounds. The rhythmic clanking of the boiler, the occasional drip from a pipe, or the hum of the washing machine. But over time, I'd grown accustomed to those familiar disturbances, and they rarely fazed me anymore. However, on this occasion, an entirely unfamiliar sound echoed from behind that utility room door. A distinct thud, like an object being dropped onto the hard floor and bouncing once or twice before coming to rest. It wasn't the usual mechanical groan. It felt deliberate, out of place. My heart skipped a beat, and without a second thought, I leaped off the couch and raced upstairs in a panic, bursting into the kitchen where my mom was busy with chores, blurting out breathlessly that there was definitely someone lurking down in the basement. My mom, ever the calm and reassuring parent, didn't panic. Instead, she gently asked me to explain what I'd heard, listening patiently as I described the noise. To ease my worries, she suggested we go check it out together, taking my hand and leading me back down those stairs. She boldly swung open the utility room door, flicked on the overhead light, which buzzed to life with a harsh fluorescent glow, and peered inside, methodically scanning the shelves, the appliances, and even behind the stacked boxes for a good minute or two. Satisfied that it was empty, she closed the door firmly and turned to me with a smile, saying, "See? No one's in there." It was probably just the house settling or something falling off a shelf. Her confidence rubbed off on me, and I felt a wave of relief wash over as she headed back upstairs to continue her tasks, leaving me to resume my gaming session with renewed bravery. I can't recall exactly how much time passed after that. Maybe half an hour, perhaps longer. But eventually my stomach growled, and I paused the game to head upstairs for a quick snack. By then, Mom was in the midst of preparing dinner, chopping vegetables at the counter, and I noticed through the windows that dusk had fully settled in, turning the outside world into a blanket of night. The basement, which got a trickle of natural light from those two small, high-up windows during the day, was now plunged into absolute pitch blackness, making it feel even more foreboding and cave-like. I munched on my snack quickly and ventured back down, flipping on the main lights to chase away the gloom, and settled in once more. Not long after, the furnace in the utility room roared to life with an unusually deafening rumble, far louder than its typical operation. Startled, I twisted around on the couch and realized with a chill that the utility room door, which Mom had securely shut earlier, was now standing wide open, revealing only inky darkness beyond the threshold. My pulse quickened as I slid off the couch and tiptoed over, peering into the void but too terrified to reach for the light switch inside. I just wanted to seal it off. Mustering every ounce of courage, I darted forward, grabbed the knob, and slammed the door shut with a resounding bang before scrambling back to the relative safety of the couch, huddling under a throw blanket as if it could shield me from whatever might be lurking. Oddly enough, in my frightened state, it didn't even cross my mind to question how or why the door had reopened on its own. I was too focused on feeling secure in my spot. The next moment is etched vividly in my memory. A low, gravelly man's voice suddenly spoke from directly behind me, cutting through the silence like a knife. At first, my brain refused to process it. It sounded so out of place, almost surreal, like a figment of my overactive imagination. But then the words registered. "My goodness, how much you've grown up." Terror gripped me as I slowly turned, my eyes widening in horror at the sight of a thin, sickly-looking man seated casually at the booth in the far corner of the basement. He was propped up with one arm on the table, his head resting lazily on his fist. His skin pale and sallow under the dim light, eyes hollow and unsettling. I was paralyzed, my body rigid with shock, unable to scream or move, my mouth hanging open in silent disbelief as my muscles twitched involuntarily. He shifted, rising from his seat in a slow, crooked manner, his posture hunched and unnatural, like he was struggling against some invisible weight. As he began to shuffle toward me, his voice continued in a murmur, "Your mother won't allow me to visit you children anymore." That broke the spell. I let out a blood-curdling scream and bolted for the stairs, my feet pounding the steps as I wailed for my mom at the top of my lungs, the fear propelling me upward like a rocket. I reached the top, slammed the basement door shut behind me, and twisted the lock with trembling hands before collapsing into my mom's arms, sobbing hysterically that there was a strange man down there. The color drained from her face in an instant. She could see the raw terror in my eyes and didn't hesitate, immediately grabbing the phone to call 911 while holding me close and whispering assurances. The wait for the authorities felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was probably only minutes. My mind blanks out the details of that tense interlude. Soon, the house was filled with police officers, their radios crackling as they methodically descended into the basement to investigate, flashlights sweeping the shadows. They found him hiding in the utility room, curled up behind some boxes. The man turned out to be my mom's long-estranged cousin, someone who'd been completely cut off from our family circle years earlier due to his involvement in unspeakable crimes against children. Acts so heinous that our parents had vowed to keep him far away from us at all costs. Mom had severed all contact, wanting nothing to do with him for our protection. Somehow, he'd managed to break into the house undetected and had been skulking down there for an unknown length of time, perhaps hours or even days, waiting for a moment like this. I didn't recognize him at all. The last time I'd seen his face, I was still in diapers, too young to form memories. The police arrested him on the spot for trespassing and violation of restraining orders, and he ended up serving another several years in prison after committing yet another related offense. We've had no idea of his whereabouts since his release, and frankly, we prefer it that way. That encounter scared me deeply. Even now, as an adult, the mere thought of venturing into a basement alone sends shivers down my spine, a lingering echo of that childhood nightmare. It was the heart of October, with Halloween decorations popping up everywhere and the air carrying that crisp autumn chill, signaling the approach of the spooky season. My cousin Ben's birthday happens to land right in the middle of it all, on October 16th, so to celebrate his turning 11 that year, our entire extended family converged on Uncle Dave and Aunt Karen's spacious suburban home for a lively birthday gathering. Our family is quite large and boisterous, with aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents all piling in, turning any event into a whirlwind of noise, laughter, and organized chaos that could rival a small festival. The weather was unseasonably warm that afternoon, with golden sunlight filtering through the turning leaves, so the majority of the party unfolded in their expansive backyard, complete with picnic tables laden with snacks, a bouncy castle for the younger kids, and games like cornhole and horseshoes keeping everyone entertained. Their house itself was a grand multi-level affair with plenty of rooms and nooks, making it an absolute paradise for childhood games, especially ones involving hiding and seeking, which had become a staple at our family get-togethers over the years. Ben and I were born just a few months apart, making us the same age and natural playmates, while my older sister Riley, who was 3 years my senior, often joined in to boss us around in the best sibling way. Our other cousins, ranging from a couple of years older to preteens, would tag along too, forming teams and adding to the excitement. The game we loved most was a variation of hide and seek where we'd divide into groups. One team would hide throughout the house while the other sought them out within a strict time limit. If discovered, the hider had a chance to evade capture by sprinting to the safety of the backyard without being tagged. We had access to nearly every inch of the house, hallways, closets, under beds, behind curtains, except for the master bedroom, which was off-limits to preserve Aunt Karen and Uncle Dave's privacy. And believe me when I say the hiding possibilities were virtually limitless. The place was a labyrinth of clever spots that could keep the game going for hours. Down in the basement, there was a dedicated creative workspace that we kids dubbed Aunt Karen's art studio. She was a talented sculptor and painter, and the room was packed with supplies. Easels, shelves overflowing with clays and paints, and an array of display pedestals holding her works in progress. Some were full-bodied figures molded in clay or plaster, others abstract torsos or busts mounted on simple stands, all arranged under adjustable spotlights with a professional camera setup and a large white backdrop for photographing her pieces. We'd been deep into the game for what felt like an eternity already, taking turns hiding and seeking. When it came time for Riley and me to conceal ourselves, she opted for a clever spot in the main basement area, squeezing behind a stack of storage bins, while I made a beeline for the art studio, grabbing a pair of cozy fleece blankets from a nearby ottoman on my way in. My plan was sneaky. I draped one blanket over one of Aunt Karen's taller sculptures, shaping it to mimic the outline of a person crouching underneath, hoping it would serve as a hilarious decoy to distract any seekers. The other blanket I used for myself, crawling under a sturdy workbench in the dimly lit corner and pulling it over my head, curling up as small as possible to wait out the round. The waiting game was always the most tedious part, especially if your spot was solid. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I listened for footsteps or voices. After a considerable stretch of silence, I heard a ruckus erupt from the adjacent main basement room. Shouts and laughter as Riley was apparently discovered and gave chase. her feet thundering up the stairs in a bid for the backyard safe zone. Then quiet descended once more, dragging on for at least 10 or 15 minutes, leaving me fidgety and bored under that blanket, my legs cramping from the awkward position. Finally, Riley's voice echoed from the doorway as she entered the studio, calling my name softly and announcing that the food was being served outside. The catered barbecue spread with burgers, hot dogs, salads, and all the fixings, so the game was officially paused for mealtime. My stomach rumbling in agreement, I threw off the blanket and hustled upstairs to the yard, joining the line for plates piled high with goodies, chatting animatedly with relatives as we ate under the fading afternoon sun. Sometime later, after devouring my meal and engaging in a light-hearted conversation with Aunt Karen about her latest art projects, a sudden realization hit me. In my haste to eat, I'd completely forgotten to tidy up those blankets in her studio. Worse yet, one was still draped over her precious sculpture, which I knew would annoy her to no end. She was particular about keeping her workspace orderly. Excusing myself after a quick trip to the bathroom to wash up, I slipped back down the basement stairs, navigating the familiar path to the art studio. I flicked on the overhead light, bathing the room in a warm glow, and immediately noticed something off. The blanket I'd placed on the sculpture was no longer there. Instead, it now covered a bulky shape slumped in one of the armchairs against the wall. A form that resembled a seated figure, but I couldn't recall any of Aunt Karen's pieces being posed that way. Curiosity mixed with a twinge of confusion as I approached slowly. The lump seemed to shift ever so slightly, and then I detected labored breathing emanating from beneath the fabric, accompanied by a pungent, unfamiliar odor that hung heavy in the air, like unwashed clothes mixed with something sour. This wasn't a prank or a game anymore. My mind raced as I realized there was a real person hiding under there. Trying to play it cool, I let out a nervous laugh and called out, "Okay, who's that? Come on out." Silence greeted me, no giggle or response, just that steady breathing. A knot of unease tightened in my gut. I bent down to peek at the bottom edge of the blanket, hoping to spot familiar sneakers or something reassuring. What I saw instead chilled me to the core. A pair of bare, dirt-streaked feet, pale and calloused, belonging to someone I didn't recognize, and certainly not matching any family member at the party, where everyone was shod and accounted for. Panic surging, I straightened up, turned on my heel and fled the room, bounding up the stairs two at a time back to the yard. Breathless, I grabbed Uncle Dave's arm and urgently whispered that he needed to call the police. There was a stranger hiding in the basement. My words sparked immediate alarm. The chatter died down as others overheard, and a wave of concern rippled through the group. Uncle Dave, ever the level-headed one, rallied a few uncles and older cousins, and they charged down to investigate, armed with flashlights and stern expressions. I trailed behind cautiously, my heart pounding. By the time we burst into the art studio, the blanket lay crumpled on the floor, and the intruder had vanished without a trace. No sign of forced entry or struggle, just an empty chair and that lingering smell. I swore up and down to everyone about what I'd witnessed. The breathing, the bare feet, the odor, insisting it wasn't my imagination running wild. Skeptical at first, the family launched a thorough search of the entire house, checking every closet, under every bed, and behind every door, but turned up nothing. Ultimately, Uncle Dave decided to involve the authorities, taking my account seriously enough to err on the side of caution. When the police arrived, it transformed the birthday party into a tense spectacle, sirens flashing, officers interviewing family members, and even curious neighbors peeking over fences to see what the commotion was about. They combed through every possible hiding spot with trained precision, but again, no intruder was found lurking anywhere. I know I didn't fabricate the experience. It was as real as the ground beneath my feet, and I still wish to this day that they'd caught the person red-handed so everyone could have seen the proof with their own eyes, validating my fear beyond any doubt. Most of my relatives did believe me, offering comforting hugs and words of support, but that lingering "what if" hung in the air. During family events like this, the doors were typically left unlocked for hours on end, with people flowing in and out constantly, grabbing drinks, using the bathroom, or stepping out for fresh air. So it wouldn't have been difficult for an outsider, perhaps a transient or someone desperate seeking shelter, to slip inside unnoticed. That funky smell certainly pointed towards someone who hadn't bathed in days, like a homeless individual looking for a quiet spot. The whole ordeal felt utterly surreal and disorienting, casting a shadow over what should have been a joyful celebration, and it remains one of those haunting, unresolved memories that pops into my mind unbidden, especially around October when the nights grow longer and the air turns crisp once more. This eerie experience unfolded back when I was just 10 years old. Fast forward to today, and I'm nearing my 26th birthday, but the details remain as sharp and vivid as if it happened yesterday. It was during our family's annual winter holiday visit to my great-grandma's charming home in the rural expanses of Montana, a time filled with snow-covered landscapes, warm fireside gatherings, and the joy of reconnecting with relatives we didn't see often enough. That particular year stood out because it was the first holiday season following my parents' divorce the previous spring, and my dad's new girlfriend was joining us for the trip, adding a layer of awkward new dynamics to the mix as we all adjusted to the changes. Grandma's place was nestled in a quaint, tight-knit community of perhaps 800 residents, mostly spread out across rolling hills and dense forests. Her house itself was a modest two-story structure, cozy and inviting, surrounded by vast acres of open fields that blanketed in snow during winter, blending seamlessly into thick woodlands that stretched as far as the eye could see. A picturesque setting that I hold dear in my memories, evoking feelings of nostalgia and peace. We'd arrived a couple of days earlier, settling into the rhythm of holiday activities like baking cookies, decorating the tree, and sharing stories around the dinner table. Then, in a delightful surprise, my aunt, uncle, and cousins, who lived in a neighboring town and had initially said work commitments would keep them away, showed up after an 8-hour drive, their car pulling into the driveway with gifts and hugs all around. My cousins and I were inseparable back then. Jake, who was my age at 10, Mia at 11, and Tyler at 13, forming our little adventure squad. One chilly evening, as the adults, including my uncle, dad's girlfriend, and a cousin from next door, gathered in the living room for grown-up conversations over coffee and desserts, we kids grew restless with the boring talk and decided to sneak off to the basement for some excitement. Our go-to game was something we called Shadow Hunt, a thrilling yet simple pursuit where Jake and Tyler would act as the shadows or monsters, hiding in the pitch-dark basement with all lights extinguished. Mia and I would then descend to hunt them down, guided by the spooky noises they'd make, growls, whispers, or rustles, to give us clues without making it too easy. If we got too close, they'd burst out with monstrous roars and chase us back to the staircase, which served as our designated safe haven. In retrospect, it sounds a bit foolish and overly simplistic, but at that age, it delivered heart-pounding scares mixed with giggles, making it endlessly fun. Jake and Tyler volunteered to hide first, bounding down the stairs into the gloom and instructing us to wait a full 2 minutes before starting our search, giving them time to find perfect spots. Mia and I lingered at the top, whispering excitedly and counting down the seconds on our fingers. When time was up, Mia led the way down the creaky steps, our eyes adjusting to the near-total darkness. The only faint illumination coming was from a single small window high on one wall, letting in a sliver of moonlight that cast elongated shadows across the cluttered space filled with old furniture, a ping-pong table, and stacks of holiday decorations. We tiptoed around, calling out softly and listening intently for any telltale sounds, our game unfolding as usual with a mix of anticipation and mock fear. As we navigated the room, a peculiar glint caught my eye in the reflection of a large mirror propped against the far wall, making me jump slightly before dismissing it as a trick of the light. But then, something far more alarming appeared. A dark silhouette standing just outside that lone window, motionless and ominous, its outline barely discernible against the snowy night beyond. I froze in place, extending an arm to halt Mia, who grumbled irritably, "Hey, why'd you stop? Come on, let's keep going." Without a word, I pointed toward the window, my finger trembling slightly. She followed my gaze, her eyes widening as she whispered urgently for Jake and Tyler to drop the game. There was someone out there watching us. From their hiding spot, Tyler's voice floated back skeptically, accusing us of trying to chicken out because we were scared. Frustration bubbled up in me. I insisted they believe us, urging, "Seriously, look up at the window right above the bookshelf." Reluctantly, they emerged from their concealment under the ping-pong table, craning their necks to peer outside. Jake let out a nervous chuckle, suggesting it was probably the neighbor out for a late-night smoke or checking on his property line. But I knew better. The neighbor always stuck to his own front porch for cigarettes, never wandering this far. Mia chimed in with another idea. Maybe it was Grandma herself, patrolling the yard as she often did to inspect for any maintenance issues, like loose shingles or animal tracks in the snow. "If it's bugging you that much," Tyler said with a sigh, "just go upstairs and check who's missing." Pretending nonchalance, I climbed the stairs under the guise of grabbing a forgotten toy or snack, slipping into the living room to subtly count heads. To my growing dread, every adult was present and accounted for, chatting animatedly, sipping drinks, no one absent or stepping out. My stomach churned with unease as I hurried back down, my voice shaky as I reported, "Guys, everyone's up there in the living room. No one's missing. That means there's really someone outside." The gravity of the situation dawned on them. Their playful smirks vanished, replaced by wide-eyed fear, and Mia started to whimper softly, tears welling up. I hushed her gently, reminding her to stay quiet so as not to alert the figure. We retreated to the top of the stairs, huddling in a tight group to whisper frantic plans. Silly ideas from Jake and Tyler, like sneaking up to scare the person away or even grabbing a slingshot to fend them off. We debated telling the adults but decided against it, worried we'd be dismissed as overimaginative kids pulling a prank. After about 5 tense minutes of deliberation, we mustered the courage to creep back down for another look. To our relief, the silhouette had disappeared, the window frame empty against the dark night. Assuming the intruder had moved on, we let out collective sighs and agreed to abandon shadow hunt for something less nerve-wracking, like a game of ping pong. We flipped on the basement lights, flooding the space with brightness, and that's when I noticed the window was cracked open just a sliver, a cold draft seeping in. A nagging doubt crept in. Had it been like that the whole time, or had someone tampered with it? As we set up the table, my gaze swept the room once more, and my heart plummeted like a stone. There, lounging casually in one of the worn armchairs tucked in the corner, was a disheveled man in his late 30s, his clothes rumpled and face unshaven, staring directly at us with an unnerving, crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. We stood there, rooted to the spot in sheer terror, the room spinning as he slowly began to rise from the chair, his movements deliberate and menacing. The spell broke when I screamed, "Run!" at the top of my lungs, and we all turned and fled up the stairs in a chaotic scramble, slamming the basement door behind us with a thunderous crash before bursting into the living room, tears streaming down our faces as we sobbed hysterically about the strange man downstairs. The adults sprang into action. My uncle, who had a background in the military and knew how to handle crises, quickly retrieved a sturdy flashlight and a defensive tool from the garage, something like a baseball bat, and led the way down to confront the threat, the other grown-ups hovering protectively around us kids. He returned after a thorough sweep, reporting that the basement was empty, the man presumably having escaped back through the now fully open window and into the night. Despite the lack of a capture, our story was taken seriously, bolstered by the discovery of fresh footprints in the snow outside, trailing from the window across the yard and vanishing into the driveway. Clear evidence that someone had indeed been there. Thankfully, a quick inventory showed nothing stolen or disturbed down there. The incident left us all shaken. We spent the rest of the evening clinging to our parents, seeking comfort in their arms, and that night, still rattled, I insisted on sharing a bed with my dad for security. We never played Shadow Hunt again, the game forever tainted by that brush with real danger. Grandma was furious upon learning the details, convinced her windows were tamper-proof from the outside, but she was profoundly grateful that none of us had been hurt in the ordeal. She passed away in the fall of 2018, and while I miss her warmth and the magic of those family visits terribly, the memory of that basement, and basements in general, still fills me with an irrational dread. Even though I haven't set foot in her old house in nearly a year, the fear lingers, making me avoid dark enclosed spaces whenever possible, a lasting scar from that chilling winter night.